Okay, so Joss, as you know, we're all about excuses here on the Socialist Shelf. We're a big fan of excuses.
Huge.
So this is I'm gonna just open up with my excuse for the day. And so if I say anything dumb or sound tired, no one can get mad at me. No one's allowed. I just got back from a protest, right? Um, and so we're literally under heat advisory right now in Atlanta, right? And we're out there for 2 hours. We march a mile and a half. Again, under heat advisory. So I just got back from that. We're marching completely peaceful march, kids, old people there, very whatever. And no joke, the Atlanta police choose to come up alongside us on their bikes and just start shoving people with the bikes for no particular reason. And this is on recording. I'm sure you'll see it on people's social medias that were there. I don't have a great link to it, but like just crazy. And it was like fine, nobody got particularly hurt or whatever, but just they started trying to box people in against the walls of City Hall or whatever. Again, there's kids, there's whatever. And it's and we're just there marching over because they killed a 62-year-old man with over 20 grandkids, deacon in his church. They killed him over a traffic stop. So I know it's like a bleak opening to talk about. And it's like an intense thing, but the Atlanta Police Department, as we've talked about before, and we'll talk about it again, is on some other shit recently. So that is both a thing to watch, and also my excuse for if I sound tired because I am tired.
All right. Well, you've heard our excuse. Crazy times, police be wilding. And, the time will come where we can wild back. But, we got to build. We got to build. So tonight, as the heat advisory sort of dissipates in the evening, if you're in air conditioning, God bless. If you're not, well, God help
Find
you.
air conditioning, yeah.
Yeah. So we have a guest tonight. We have Aaron Thorpe from the Trillbilly Workers Party, from Everybody Loves Communism, from Struggle Session on occasion, and he is also an up-and-coming writer. Aaron, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, guys. I especially wanted to do this because I'm like getting back into reading fiction, writing fiction,
Mm.
and I like talking about books. Like I like talking about comics and movies and unfortunately politics when I have to, but but I like talking about the things that actually have, not that organizing or leftist politics isn't a passion, but sometimes it feels like work, necessary work, so it's
Sure.
always nice to talk about literature that are rooted in these themes, but also that present alternative possibilities and better
Hmm.
futures, especially hearing you, Jacob, talk about because we're all in Atlanta, and I was telling you I haven't been as involved in the organizing to stop moving against Cop City. I need to get involved, but just seeing sort of like the response, we were talking about the DMs, the response from the cops,
Hmm.
um, and I actually, when I was reading, because I read the stories again today, there were some themes there about coercion, about power, about sort of like the ways that I guess I don't want to say that we submit to power, acquiesce to power, right? Because it's not like people aren't fighting back, but these very normalized power relations and dynamics, And
Right.
I don't know, not to ramble, but I just want to close that part out by saying, going back to Cop City, this is just the Stop Cop City movement. This is just like, I think, one of those flashpoints, like not just in the country, but possibly like when people look back at this, like, if we're around in like another decade or so, the start of something promising,
Mhm.
So just shout out to you guys for being in the trenches and doing the work, and for everybody who's involved in the Stop Cop
Yeah.
City
Shout
movement
out
in
to
Atlanta and
everybody who's
across
Hey,
doing
the
the
man,
work.
shout
country,
right back. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you used the word flashpoint as well, because that's what kept coming to my mind when I
Paradox.
was reading paradox time.
No, Flashpoint Paradox. Sorry, that's silly.
yeah. Yo, we can get into that. I'm a call.
Yeah, that would be a whole nother thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
the
ahead, Joss. I cut you
the
off.
yeah, but I don't even know if we mentioned what we're reading tonight. We have tonight our first repeat author that we're whose work we're discussing. It is Octavia Butler with her short story collection Bloodchild, and we
Hmm.
are discussing three short stories therefrom. We've got Amnesty, we've got the Book of Martha, and we've got the titular Bloodchild, of course.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
we have, yeah, talk.
flashpoints.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Flashpoints was kind of in my mind because all these stories, it seems, come at kind of inflection points for the characters, you know. And Aaron, as you were saying, you know, it's about not necessarily acquiescing, not necessarily knuckling under in one paradigm of oppression or control or another, but adapting to it, right, and figuring
Yeah.
out how one can how one can survive therein, if not fight back.
Well, and in one case, being in control while having all the power, but we'll get to that. You're
Yeah.
under
Yeah.
control while, yeah, it's wild. But yeah, we're not going to do a full author bio like we normally do. If you go back and listen to our episodes on Parable of Sower, we do talk about Octavia Butler. I will apologize for those who do that because we didn't back then. We didn't just do the upfront. Here's the author bio for the first 20 minutes and then go into the story. That makes a lot more sense than what we do in that episode, which is just like sprinkle in bits and pieces throughout the episode. But nevertheless, Octavia Butler, if you listen to those episodes, we're huge fans. She's a great writer. But what we're talking about today is actually a lot more of the typical thing she wrote than Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, which was a much more grounded text. She is much more the fan of just wild out there sci-fi. She loves to
Yeah.
just go for it. And just throw words and concepts and ideas at you and just like you can figure it out.
Yeah.
And her words and concepts and ideas are cool enough that it's worth taking the time to figure out. Um,
Can I
Aaron,
just
what's
add?
your, yeah, go for it. I was
No,
going
no.
to
I
ask
just
what your
want.
relationship to like Octavia
Mhm.
Butler's work
Oh
is
yeah,
as well. Yeah,
perfect actually, because I was just about to so another reason why I wanted to come on to and talk to you guys about this because despite the fact that I am I'm a black science fiction writer or a science fiction enthusiast, people like Samuel Delany and Octavia Butler are like sort of these icons, right?
mm,
Within like not just like sci-fi broadly, but especially sci-fi written by marginalized people. And
for sure.
dude, I have Parable of the Sour. It's actually not even on my bookshelf. I think it's like stacked on the floor on top of under a bunch of other books. And it's from a friend. And I'll be honest with you, I have not read it. This is the first
Mm,
time I think I read like the first chapter, but I just never got around to finishing it. And when I got back into reading this year, I decided to I got Dark Matter, which is a collection edited by Sri Renee Thomas, who's now the
mm,
editor-in-chief of a magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And
Hmm.
it's just a collection of I really recommend people check this out. There are some Octavia Butler stories. And actually, the morning, the evening, and the night, I think, which is included in Bloodchild, is included in that collection as well. And it's black speculative fiction. But
yeah.
I got Bloodchild. I bought it on my Kindle after that, and it was just kind of fortuitous that while I was like kind of like looking at it on my like Kindle library homepage, like we were talking about it. You were like, "Yo, what? Well, how about these three stories?" I was like, "This is a perfect time to get into it." And I'll add that two of the stories, I think. Well, I know Bloodchild was published in Omni magazine,
Hmm.
and if anybody follows me on Twitter and knows my sci-fi account, I fucking love Omni magazine because
Hmm.
it truly encapsulates exactly what you were just saying, Jacob, about the kind of writing that she does, which is I don't know. It's weird fiction. I guess the way you could say it is weird fiction, speculative fiction. It's weird fiction,
Hmm.
but there are
Hmm.
elements of fantasy, horror, and sci-fi. And
Hmm.
and
Bloodchild
I,
was terrifying.
yeah, it was
Oh yeah.
terrifying. You know, we'll get into it, but the last thing I'll say is like I just really like weird fiction. Like one of its I guess tenets is sort of it sort of reminds me of magical realism in a way where
Yeah.
there are these supernatural, fantastical elements in mundane or urban settings, you know.
Hmm.
Or in Bloodchild and all of these, the settings are pretty fantastical, but well, maybe not so much in Amnesty because that is like an alien invasion, like
Hmm.
in our world. But she teases these things out in such a way that I think in genre fiction, I think there's a lot of exposition, there's a lot of info dumping, and I really
Hmm.
enjoyed her preface to this because she talks about the same difficulty I have with writing short stories, right? I don't even think I could write a fucking novel, right? I focus on
Hmm.
short stories, but they're especially hard because there's so many ideas, right, that you
Hmm.
want to pack in
You want to make it
so many
bigger, yeah. Because, and honestly,
exactly,
reading this, I'm like, wait, give me more. And I
exactly,
understand
yeah,
why she can't, because then that would distract from like this packet she's giving. And she
Exactly.
even says in the I'm not sure if this is from the opening or if the first edition or the re-release, but the one I read, she says, I gave up short stories the way people did cigarettes over and over again,
Mhm.
because she was like, she always would be like, oh no, it's easy. I'll crank out a short story. And then she wanted to make it into a novel. And you can see each of these three concepts have like a wealth of concepts to them. And she does have some novels that clearly feel like a short story that grew. Dawn easily could have been one of these short stories. It's the same kind of world. Recommend people read Dawn. Very interesting book. Also the book that kind of launched her career. But yeah, that's definitely the direction. And we haven't talked much about short stories on this pod. Um, but we're gonna talk about these three. And we'll just sort of get them into them one at a time. This is it's called Bloodchild. Y'all want to start off with
Yeah.
Bloodchild? Y'all are cool with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Launch
Yeah.
it at
Yeah.
first.
Absolutely.
The overall, this one is none of these three have plots that are incredibly complicated to explain. As always, spoiler alert, but y'all know that. Um, and these are all, these are all things you can go and read pretty quickly. So if you want to pause it, go read them, come back, feel free. We won't be
Really
offended.
recommend that. Really recommend that as well. 'Cause
I
Bloodchild,
agree.
I
Yeah.
think it won. What did it won? Bloodchild won like a Nebula Award, I think, when it came out,
Yeah,
and
no, it's excellent.
Mhm.
it's very good. It's very good.
Yeah. And see, we won't say that with every book because sometime in the next couple of weeks we're reading Ben Shapiro's novel. Don't recommend you read that. Just listen to ours. But
You
Oh
guys are
boy.
troopers, man. I had to read an Obama book for an episode I did with Jamie Peck, my co-host, and
Yeah, huh?
Q. People know Q from Twitter, maybe, and that was a I don't like hate reading things, so I
yeah,
commend you guys for doing
it's
that.
rough. We read
Yeah,
Bill
we w-
Clinton's novel, The President is Missing, and that one burned us out. But
Jesus Christ.
but let's focus on good fiction for now.
Yeah, let's
Good
focus on
fiction.
yeah,
good fiction.
we won't dwell on that for now. We'll do plenty of
Mm,
dwelling in the next couple of weeks. Oh boy.
yeah.
Plenty of
But yeah, no,
dwelling, a little bit of yelling.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Bloodchild. This was published in, I believe, 1984,
Mm.
right? Yeah. Or I'm sorry, it was the originally published in 1984. The short story, and was released. The collection was released in 1995, with
Mhm.
2005 having the expanded edition that contains these extra two stories. Um, but yeah, and this won a Hugo Award and a Nebula Award. This is pretty early in her career. She's not a super breakout writer at this point. She's not writing full time at this point when she writes this. But it's basically about this unusual, bizarre bond between this race of, and it's hard to even really picture them. They're called the Tick, right? Or
Yeah, is it
Tlick,
Talik?
Click. How'd y'all say it?
Talik. I said it like
Tlick.
Talik when I
Yeah.
yeah.
See, I imagine it's like an
Yeah, Tlick,
insect
like
Yes, like a
you
chittering
know
almost.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if that sounds
A human
uncomfortable, it's because it
approximation. Yeah.
is.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah.
variously described as
Yeah.
segmented, long, sinuous. There's a passage where they're described as they have bones, right? But when they move quickly, they're like flowing almost.
Yeah, when they
Like
move
water,
landing,
yeah.
running, they're like water, which I loved, which I guess I thought of like a centipede or a millipede,
Hmm.
when she
Hmm.
was like, but also too, like she paints these descriptions of these monsters, these aliens that you don't really have a concrete idea of how they look, but you
Mm-mm.
don't really need one because you sort of fill in those blanks with the details that she gives. I mean, she's an amazing writer. Her prose is incredible, but
Yeah, if she
describing
wanted
these
you to know,
creatures,
she would tell you,
Oh
you
yeah.
yes,
know?
exactly. Which I think is part of the appeal, the mystery of these
Hmm.
creatures.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, because she
We'll
knows how to
find as
get.
well, like the. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say she knows how to describe something in hyper realistic detail if she wants to. We read,
Hmm.
Parable of the Sower. She has passages in that where she describes like wounds down to like the granular level to make you feel the pain. Because
Mm.
that's like the protagonist's ability. She literally feels pain. And this, she wants to give you this broader sense. If you're in the mind of this character, Gan, the main guy, and he's so familiar with these creatures, to even explain it from his perspective would be weird. It's like everybody knows the
Mhm.
Tlick.
Yeah,
This is,
yeah.
I don't know how long ago the Tlick sort of conquered humanity, but it's so far in the past, or at least feels so far in the past for these people. It's not really even on the radar. This isn't even an invading species in their mind, the way in the second
Hmm.
thing is. To see them as invaders is sort of the dissident position.
Yeah.
Well, and in a way, it's not even, I don't think you could even call us the invaders, right? Because we're led to believe that the human population here is a refugee population from like Earth or from like some other
Yeah, it's a little unclear.
yeah, some other human
Mm.
polity scattered throughout the galaxy somewhere. Of course, we're a spacefaring civilization by then, but you know these people are cut off from humanity prime, I suppose.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so it's not even. I would hesitate to even call it a conquest. I would hesitate to call it an invasion because we're sort of presented with a symbiotic relationship here between these two
Yeah.
species in a way
I
that
mean,
we'll get
there's
into.
definitely a dominant species, though. It's definitely
Yes,
the Tlick.
yes.
Like,
Yeah,
Mhm.
but it's not. I get what you're saying, Joss, because not to drop, but just to like add, I get what you're saying because it's not the typical alien invasion story
yeah, that's
where
true.
one race is conquering another. Although, I mean, they are, which is an interesting point though, where one of the characters and we'll get into it to get to the plot kind of I guess too, but one of the characters that they talk about you find out that he's described as having brown skin, like he's black, right?
Hmm.
And then
Mhm.
I think Tagoi, which is the main Talik, right? The secondary character. She's
Toy.
yeah, Gatoy. She says that your people would have been enslaved had they stayed on Earth. So again, this is Octavia Butler playing around with like a lot of people thought this was an allegory for slavery, which I didn't see it as that, but she is
Oh yeah,
playing along with
she
yeah,
categorically denied it in the essay following the
yes,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. But
Hmm.
there is this idea of like a marginalized, displaced people, whether it's
Yes.
humanity generally, but also when I'm reading it, she describes like, okay, are these black people who left Earth? But it doesn't matter how, it doesn't
Hmm.
matter that she doesn't describe it. It's just sort of an analogy that really works for the story, you know?
Hmm.
I like to imagine that this takes place 100 years after Starship Troopers, and it's just some stranded humans that tried to fight the bug people.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, yeah. So basically, you have this child, Gan, and Gan is a teenage boy. I'm not exactly sure how old he is. I don't think. And he and his family have this relationship with a Tlick in particular. Let's this this do you say Ngatoy? Is that it? Or
Toy.
To
Chugatoy, yeah. And took its toy. I don't know.
it's a
Basically
chittering,
feeds
literally.
them like these eggs that will like sedate them and are like have like a drug-like quality. I'm
Hmm.
trying to get one of those eggs, check them out. But
And
Well, and
prolong
this
this
life,
sounds
is
apparently, too.
and for
yes,
long life,
yes.
like a drug that makes is good for you. You know, they're
And
onto something here.
this is where Octavia Butler's attention to detail, I think, comes into play because you know, you mentioned that she describes wounds very granularly, and indeed she will later in the story.
Hmm.
But um like Lovecraft with weird fiction, right? The strength lies in both what you describe and thus when you've proven your sort of describing chops, what you don't describe, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And which makes her really good at dramatic irony, right? You know, so you know, we open with the family kind of lounging around, and Gon is, you know, sipping
An
from
egg.
his egg that Tagatoy has provided, right?
And like
And
cuddling with Togatsoy.
and
Yeah,
This
like
this
he's
she has
insect.
her limbs wrapped around him,
Ugh,
like a cage almost is the way he describes it, or
don't
his
like it.
family is still cage, right?
and
Hmm.
here he's wondering why my mother denied herself such a harmless pleasure, right? And right off the bat, like even if you've not read the story, you're like, okay, there's some dramatic irony going on here.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think Gani even says like that his mother is often at her most polite and severe when she's lying. So there is
Hmm.
something where like, okay, there's something going on with these eggs, right? This is a symbiotic relationship, but it also feels like this power dynamic that's not even just been normalized, but just sort of like accepted as a way of survival for this like this exiled human race, you know?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. And basically the reason the humans are useful to the Tlick is because they're a very good vessel for bearing their young. They're these larvae that they put inside of them, basically, grow inside the human. And the idea is you'll have a good relationship. There'll be this symbiotic relationship where it's sort of a partnership. Be able to remove the larva in a sort of nice and sanitized fashion with the human being unconscious. Um, as you might guess, it doesn't always happen like that. In this story, Gan witnesses a man giving birth sort of and having a C-section essentially while awake of these things eating him, and has to go and get a live beast for these larvae to eat instead of the human. And Gan, being in this relationship with a Tlick, knows, oh shoot, like these things are going to be in me too, and even if I don't see it, this is what happens. And there's
Then
this
they're gonna eat me too.
horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
and you're
god.
being literally eaten on the inside, and it's horrifying. But then the Tlick see it as like humane. They're like, well, we could have turned humans into big dumb animals, and we didn't do that. And
Exactly.
Mhm.
This is the way we have to
yeah,
coexist, right? If we're gonna live together, you know.
which when I learned that, I just wrote with a bunch of question marks around it. Gender commentary? Question mark? Question mark? Question mark? Like, there's
Yeah.
it's a little unclear exactly what this is about, but it is
Mhm.
very, but it's deeply unsettling. I mean,
Yeah,
even
Yeah.
just the
it could
description.
be it could be gender commentary, it could be race commentary, even, she said she didn't write it specifically about slavery, but again, Aaron, you're correct. There's this sort of frame of reference that you're writing from. Like you have one group that's using another group for, we assume labor, for we assume, reproduction, of course. That's it's an inescapable sort of thing that you think about. And again, the sort of humane way that this birth is supposed to occur, of course, happens in the context of Tagatoi being a quote unquote good owner, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to add too, like one thing that Octavia Butler had said, and it's very apparent off the bat, is that she wanted to play around with male pregnancies. And in the
Yeah.
story, you find out that the Talik prefer male hosts, even
Mhm.
though like apparently they also think that maybe well women like their body fat, they have more body fat to protect the larva or whatever. But she wanted to like put a male in a position where they like and this is kind of maybe this is the part that kind of made me feel comfortable too, thinking about like the history of like black people in slavery
Right.
is like
Mhm.
black women slaves being forced to carry fucking children that
Right.
weren't theirs, right? That this was not consensual, this was rape, right?
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
how uncomfortable that is, right? That power dynamic, but also as a male, right? Where you are not siloed into this gender role in society, and you're confronted with the fact that now not only is it normalized, but actually it's tantamount to torture, essentially, is what it is,
Hmm.
right? Or animal or abuse if you're using this person as an animal. Because I think Gon asked Tagoi, are we animals to you? And she's like, no, this is why we did away with the forced family separations. But that power dynamic is still there.
Hmm.
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
always implicit. Like they could, if you said no, like they're gonna get someone else, and if everyone said no, they'd make it happen one way or another. I mean, they're
Indeed, that
living on a
precise threat,
reservation.
yes. That precise
They're
threat
living
is
on a
levied toward the end of the story.
Yeah, they're living on a reservation. They're restricted. We don't know what all the restrictions are, but like they have an illegal gun, which means the Tlick are setting the rules for them. And clearly like this Tlick that hangs out with them is like supposed to be one of the like more kind ones that respects humans more, and probably internally sees herself as like better than some of the other Tlick. And it's like, no, I treat them better. And it's like, from the outside, it's so much like, well, this is just such a messed up dynamic. This is so uncomfortable. But everyone inside of it, that is the dynamic they have. Flick need to reproduce somehow, and the humans are reliant. I don't know, but I have trouble imagining the humans like have their own agriculture and their own whatever. I kind
Yeah.
of imagine this world where they're just being provided stuff and living on this reservation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's interesting because it is symbiotic, not in like a healthy way, but it is symbiotic. And all these stories that we talk about are kind of like that. You have a higher being and a lower being, sort of, that the higher being
Mm-hmm.
has some reliance on the lower being in some way. And that's also the story of Dawn, which is what launched Octavia Butler's career, is about aliens who need to draw from a lesser species, a lesser equal species, and switch genes with them to continue to grow and spread across the universe. And a
Can I
sort
just
of,
say that
yeah, go ahead.
just like that's just such an amazing I really like the way you put that these three stories are about a higher, well, quote, higher being or
More
organism that
powerful, yeah.
depends, yeah, more powerful, that depends on another one. Because and I think in a lot of sci-fi like alien invasion stories, it's always about what resource, which never really makes sense to me, because like if you wanted to come to Earth for fucking water, there's water abundant in space in itself,
Right.
right? I mean, you can go to a
Hmm.
meet, whatever, but this one is like, oh, to propagate life, right? Like it's something that's so fundamental that when Gon talks about is it I keep is it to go away to go away
Tagatoi, I
to got
that's
toy
how yeah, that's how I
Gatoy.
pronounce it.
when she talks about or when Gon talks about the fact that she got into politics, you know, and that she is the only thing that is standing in the way of all of these hordes, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, you know, I'm like, I'm just kind of like spitballing here because I'm thinking about it, but I'm gonna try to make a connection like with the right wing, right? And their like project, I think part of their project is progeny, right? Part of their project is social reproduction. I mean, this is why they're up in arms about critical race theory, right? And about the great replacement and about
Mhm.
abortion
Hmm.
and about being transphobic because it's their idea like an existential battle of reproduction and reproducing their way of life. And
Exactly.
it really had me thinking like, like what I mean, what would people or an alien race be willing to do, right? Even if it was to kind of engage in this kind of soft power dynamic, with the human species in order for them to survive. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't know,
Mhm.
Which
just that kind of concept, just kind of really, I don't know. It was powerful. It was really powerful in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And which soft power dynamic emerges, we're given to understand from struggle, right? Because it's
Yeah,
the assassinations are a period that's referred to, right? When humanity fought back at one point and there was open warfare between them. And so we understand, again, we get this filtered through the understanding of Tagatoi, but we understand that at one point there was a period of hostility and they fought to some sort of stalemate.
yeah,
And some sort of stalemate which we are led to believe is constantly being picked away at, as this ruling class inevitably does.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and and it kind of leads into, the Gon's family has this illegal gun. Um, which it's like not seen as like an act of rebellion necessarily. It's like, oh, y'all aren't supposed to have that, like they don't seem like actively scared. But because Gon, speaks with her brother, who her brother is very, skeptical about this whole process. Gon is a guy. Gon speaks about his brother. My bad.
mm,
Gon speaks with his brother about this thing, and they're skeptical of this whole process. Um, he's terrified from what he's seen, and he knows he's very soon going to be literally impregnated with these larvae that will eat him. Um, he takes the gun and is considering either killing Tagatoi or killing himself.
yeah,
I'm glad I'm
Um,
not
yeah.
the only one who thought Gon was female at
I thought
first.
Gon
Like it
was
didn't,
female
Yeah, I
till
thought
yeah,
Gon was female at first too. I did.
it
yeah, it
didn't,
throws
yeah,
me
it didn't
off.
click for me until quite late in the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and which I think maybe is on purpose.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it is worth noting, Octavia Butler, the vast majority of her protagonists are female. The vast majority of her protagonists are Black women. And in
Mm,
everything I've read except this story by Octavia Butler, the
mm,
protagonist has been a Black woman. Which of course,
yeah,
you write, you put yourself in stories and you put, and that's what she wanted to write about. That's what she got into sci-fi because she said Black women were underrepresented in sci-fi. They still are.
Hmm.
Um,
mm,
and so, but she chose Gon in this case as a guy because I think it makes the commentary and the point and the sort of inversion work
yeah,
more effectively. But Gon is sort of given this choice that's not a choice because it's like, okay, Gon isn't gonna have some active like revolutionary change if he kills himself or kills um Tagatoi. But Chigatoi's like, oh, I am giving you a choice. I am giving you a moment. Oh, I'll just go and impregnate your sister or whatever. Or
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and Tagatoi in her own mind is clearly like, oh yeah, no, I'm being like cool and like open and giving
I'm
these
being
humans
reasonable
a
about this.
chance.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, but there are only so many options out, and most of them are either violent or to like accept your fate. And the accepting your fate is unfortunately the most comfortable option, and that's what gets taken.
Yeah, yeah, and
Uh,
also too, I found what was interesting too is that we've been talking about it in which it is about these power dynamics, right? And this symbiotic, and again, it is symbiotic, but
yeah,
there's a gradient to it. It's obviously a power dynamic there, but Gon at first when that scene when he takes out the gun, he's cleaning it, right? And is like, are you gonna kill? Is he gonna kill Tagator? Or is he gonna kill himself? And then he ends up kind of like making the choice, right, to be a host, to be impregnated because he wants to save his sister. He He wants to save her from undergoing that. And I thought that was really powerful, right? Because true, Gon doesn't really have a choice in this story. The society is already predetermined, but this act of love, to like go through with this horrible thing. I mean, at least the way that it happened to I think Bromos is the character's name who is brought in, who Gon sees getting pretty much opened up like a C-section, right, and having the larva removed. Gon doesn't want his sister to go through that, right? And I just thought that was really like there was a really quiet, powerful act of love there, while essentially he's getting impregnated by Tagatoy in that scene that
yeah.
I don't know. It didn't feel so. I mean, the end bummed me out for sure, but there was kind of this beautiful optimism in there. I don't know, man. It was this weird kind of feeling where, wow, this is fucking horrible, but you also did this out of love, though, to protect your sister,
Right. Well, yeah, because he didn't take it wasn't a selfish choice, It
Yeah.
was maybe it was the quote unquote easy road, but it was not an easy road. But and you could, get into, okay, how much is for the sister? How much is like, because this is expected? How much of this is because he's still high on this egg? What is this egg even doing to him? We don't really know.
That's the thing, because the egg makes people more suggestible and relaxed, basically. So there is always that kind of hanging over. Notably, the mother, we might have mentioned it before. The mother refuses to take these things, right? The
mother gets like pushed into it. Yeah.
Yeah. The father, was sucking him down all his life. And it grants him a natural long life. But no, the mother knows that this is fucked up.
And the mother seems to have like gone cynical at some point in the past, and it's not seems like she wasn't always. But yeah, it's interesting because like that there is this moment where Tagatoy thinks she's being good and cool by saying like, no, you need to take my sting, you need to take this egg, you need to relax, you whatever, and like literally basically forcing this woman to drug herself because she's like, no, literally. You need to relax, and she sees it as, oh, am I not being such a good friend helping this poor stupid woman relax? And it's like, well, no, you just drugged this woman, like
yeah. And there's a line where Tagatoy says too, she says because Gon's mother's name is Leanne, and she says, Leanne, this home is like a sanctuary to me, and you won't even take care of yourself. And it's like, dude, that's hell selfish, man. Like you're keeping her alive, not only because like this family is gonna help like kind of foster your larva baby, but also too because this gives you comfort, like as if they were pets,
And it's interesting. And it is also interesting that Octavia Butler chose to make this the titular story, that chose to make Bloodchild, the header of this whole thing. And I think that's partially because of the dynamic it introduces. I think partially is probably just because it was already an incredibly successful work. That's just a practical decision. But also like, having it up front, having it as the thing on the mind. I think it is a strong embodiment in a very condensed package of like what a lot of her work is, which is dealing with a lot of things that could mean a lot of things, that could go a lot of directions, that you kind of have to stretch your mind to fill in the blanks, even to see the scenery. And it leaves you with more questions than answers. I think that's what she's trying to create here. And that's probably why she chose Bloodchild. Bloodchild's actually not my favorite of the three. I really like Book of Martha the best, but I understand why this isn't Book of Martha and Other Stories. This is Bloodchild and Other Stories, because I think it thematically makes sense. That and Book of Martha wasn't added to the second edition, but that's not the point.
What I'll say too, from a writing standpoint, with the story is that she was partially inspired by the botfly, I think they're called botflies, which are flies that I guess in South America, which they lay their eggs in the wounds made by other insects. So eventually you have a larva growing like under your flesh, and then the fly flies out. And what she said was in the afterword, and I really like too the afterwards, because I usually don't like afterwards, or I don't like a pre-commentary. I usually hate that shit. Thankfully, these were all very short, and also she didn't explain the work. She just explained kind of her methodology behind it, which as a writer, I really appreciated. And one thing she said was that whenever she is stressed out about something or trying to work through a problem or fear, she writes it out. And I know that sounds really basic, but she came up with a beautiful story out of like, a fear of like, I mean, no, those things sound really terrifying, but out of something sort of mundane, if not horrifying, mundane. And she ended up saying that she writing about them made them less terrifying and more interesting.
Yeah.
And like as again, like I really appreciate that sort of commentary that she gives because it makes you appreciate her craft so much more because there's a lot of like
Hmm.
forethought into it that I can relate to as well as a writer. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. This probably was my favorite out of
Hmm.
them, but also too, I have a preference for Omni magazine, so anything that's
Sure.
published in it, I'm like, fuck yeah. But no,
Hmm.
I really enjoyed this story.
Looking into that after the botfly thing, I looked into the botfly more, and I
Oh God,
found,
I'm so sorry.
oh my God,
Those
it's
things are fucking terrifying.
horrifying. I also found there's a large internet community of people who share botfly extraction videos, which is people
No,
are
dude,
crazy.
I am so good on that. Oh my God. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
it
imagining that in
maybe,
my mind.
and it's bad. It's really bad.
I think on the popping subreddit there's specifically a botfly tag, but there might be a subreddit
Ugh.
specifically dedicated to that. I don't know.
I mean, people are gross, man. But
Yeah,
like,
I could pimple popping is one thing. I don't want to see bot
that's like
fucking
another lever. It's called
yeah,
living creature, yeah.
yeah,
But like, and it's also interesting though because I feel like it's Octavia Butler. She didn't really live to see the internet grow to what it is, but she probably would have been fascinated by like what are these freaks? They're like, it's interesting. Like the people, but people are gravitate towards the grotesque. Like there is something
yes,
about something that's deeply unsettling that like draws us in. It's why like good horror and stuff fascinates people. Um,
yes.
and some people need to watch those videos, I guess. I don't know. No hate to anybody who's listening to watch this video, but like I don't get it. But it is interesting. But yeah, I
Well,
don't want to
before we
yeah, go
move on
ahead.
from the botflies, something occurred to me, Aaron, that you reminded me of actually,
Mm.
where she discusses the botfly sort of influence on her story. She also mentions that you've got to wait for the botfly thing to run its course, right? Because if you just
Yeah.
like rip that shit out, right, there's a risk of infection, and that interests me, right? Because
Mm.
it ties back to that theme of these stories as like transitional periods, as like moments in a particular struggle where it can't come to fruition and you just sort of had to figure out how to adapt, right?
Mm.
Because again, they've only got the one gun. Humans can't drive except for like farming implements, right? So what do you do with that in the meantime, right? How do you adapt? How do you find some beauty in the fundamentally grotesque sex scene that we end with? How do you cuddle after an alien drops an egg in you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a
You
that's a
thought
re
it was grotesque to have the blind probing of an Avi poster? Go ahead, Aaron. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
I
Some
also
people are into that
love
shit.
I didn't even know what that was, but obviously like because of the description that she's giving, and that was like beautifully disgusting. It was like
Hmm.
sublimely grotesque.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the descriptions as well, of the larva being pulled out of the sky and they're slimy and covered in blood and blind. Like, yeah, for a minute I had to kind of put down, like I was like, okay,
Hmm.
I need a minute. This shit is like, but it's so good, man. She makes it almost sound beautiful in a way.
Yeah. No, I actually, gross as it is, I do want to like read a quick passage just so people can kind of get
Yes.
the idea. This is towards
100%.
the end when Gon is, decided I'm going to go through with it. And it says, I undressed and laid down beside her. I knew what to do, what to expect. I had been told all my life. That was interesting. I felt the familiar sting, narcotic, mildly pleasant, then the blind probing of her ovipositor. The puncture was painless, easy, so easy going in. She undulated slowly against me, her muscles forcing the egg from her body into mine. And like, like it's
Yes.
so uncomfortable, and it's such
You
a
can imagine the
subversion of
egg
like,
dropping through. Oh
mm-hmm.
God. Yeah.
And it's like, and it like it has, and then afterwards he's like caged in her limbs and is like, and it's like it's a subversion of like what could be something tender or whatever, and that he's literally been told all his life. That's an interesting line there. The concept of you know he's like literally been groomed into this.
Oh yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. And
And-
also too, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go for it.
No, I was just gonna say also too, just like the minute that he sees this man brought in, where these larvae or like I guess they have to be taken out. Like, I guess his Talik was supposed to do it. I don't know, or he's sick or something like that. And it's when Gon actually like looks at this guy, like you were saying this earlier, Jacob, and says, "Wait, that shit's gonna happen to me."
Right.
It's sort of like like expectation versus reality, right? Like you've been
Hmm.
told all your life that this is how this is going to work out, but you don't really know until the ovipositor is, in your
It's
belly button or
there.
wherever she
Yeah,
injected
or
it.
whatever the
Hmm.
hell. Well, I want to go ahead and move on to the next story, not because we
Mhm.
couldn't talk about this more, but just for the sake of time.
Yeah, 100%.
Unless y'all have any burning things to finish on with here, is there anything else
Um,
y'all want to add before we hop
last
on?
last thing I'll add about the story is that I mean I guess you already said it, Jake, was that I think this is a for someone who's never for someone who's never read any of her work before, which is again shameful. I do think this is like this I think is a great example of not just not just like the kind of fiction that she writes in particular, but I mean what good black speculative fiction looks like, you know what I mean? Where I don't know, man. I feel like sometimes that there's this almost fetishization of marginalized writers, right?
Hmm.
Like I feel like SFF editors will say that hey, we want diverse voices, and I've tweeted about this, but it's always caged in a certain expectation of what they actually want, right? Like,
Right.
okay, this story is either too black or not black enough, right? Or too
Mm.
and she again mixes all these different themes that when you finish reading it you don't really have a one-to-one analogy, but the themes are there, and it almost seems like she could be talking about any number of things. And I don't know, I just really appreciated that. I really did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of weird themes, segue there. Amnesty is the next short story here.
Oh yeah, and boy, if you thought the aliens in fucking Bloodchild were weird, oh boy.
Dude, it took me
Communities.
a while to even like because this one is a lot of it's not broken up by much dialogue until one character gives an entire, but even then she's telling a story.
Mm,
But the combination of the descriptions and like this is probably also because my brain is damaged by the internet, but the blocks of paragraphs and everything is so how can I put it? She really paints this picture, I guess. It's very evocative that
she takes her time on this one, yeah.
yeah, and I didn't even know what they looked like at first, you know. I don't know, they're just very weird
Yeah.
creatures. They're very weird aliens.
I will say with Amnesty, and this is worth noting before we get into it. This was explicitly based on a story, a real thing that happened. And
Hmm.
be clear, this was published on Sci-Fi Magazine, or not Sci-Fi Magazine, sci-fi.com in 2003, and was later included in the republish of this, the re-release of Bloodchild's collection.
Late
Um,
Butler.
yeah. Yes, very late Butler, shortly before her accident and her death. Yeah.
Hmm.
She but yeah, she based this on this story of Win Ho Lee, Dr. Win Ho Lee, who is a Taiwanese American scientist who worked for the American government, did nuclear science, was accused of selling China nuclear secrets. Later turned out to be completely fake. Did not sell anybody anything. He had went under solitary without bail for a year and was tortured in prison. Was some of the tortures that are described in this short story of being tied to a chair and forced to experience things, Dr. Winho Lee did experience. The
Jesus.
government publicly maligned him, the media maligned him without any sort of evidence. Even in Congress and stuff, people were maligning him. Um, it turns out the only thing he did was potentially mishandle some information, but even then, that's skeptical. It's like sort of up in the air. He was in jail for quite a while before he had to be released on literally there being no evidence at all. Um, he was given a settlement in 2006 of $1.6 million, but federal stipulation was it only could apply to his legal fees. So the money was only allowed to cover his legal fees. Dude, basically they were like, all right, you're not in debt from this. But so yeah,
You
had his
just
career
wasted
completely
years of your
destroyed.
fucking life.
God.
Yeah,
And his
destroyed his
body
career,
was
wasted his
destroyed.
life.
And his body was he was physically destroyed and mentally destroyed from solitary confinement. Um, and since then he has kept a low profile, but did write a physics textbook. But he's a very solitary guy. But Octavia Butler read the story. This is pre even the settlement, pitiful as the settlement was, and pre even like sort of admission of guilt by the U.S. government. And this sort of this railroading of this guy, this very racist railroading of this guy, because they were like, oh, well, he's a Taiwanese scientist. He's probably selling secrets to China or whatever. So that is what inspired this short story. Yeah, it's a story every bit as it's and in the short story. I mean, if you read the short story or you hear the plot of it, you can see it was drawn from. But yeah, do y'all want to talk a little bit about the plot of this one, because it's not too complicated, like just if you give the bullet points, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Uh, this one, I mean, where we even start with this one, man?
Noah.
I guess this one takes place with, it starts with what are called employers, I guess, which
Hmm.
are these communities, which I guess are described as like what they're described as like bushes, almost like these floating
Yeah,
bushes, I guess.
trees, but they're collections of different teeny organisms that latch
Yes.
together to make. um I don't know if any of y'all, like anyone has ever read, anyone who's listening, or either of y'all have ever read or seen any of the Star Wars Legends, which is like pre-Disney buying Star Wars. But there was a
Mhm.
species called the Yuzhang Vong that was come up with for these graphic
Oh, those
novels.
guys. Yeah.
And they use biotechnology, and this was like big in the 90s when there was no new movies after episode 6, and like there's a huge war against the Yuzhang Vong, and they're awesome. I loved it as a kid. The books probably suck, to be clear, but the
Mhm.
concepts stick in my brain. And this is like straight out of that. These like biotechnology, these things linked together to build these huge whatever, and no one understands them. And fascinating. If anyone's interested, there go on a
Yeah.
Wikipedia deep dive. There's a lot of information there. But yeah,
I just like that idea of like a super organism, I guess, right? Like
yeah,
all these hundred different entities that make this one community, and they're called communities
communities,
too, which I thought was really,
weird vibes.
yeah. I guess it reminded me of like colonies of like coral polyps. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and basically you have this main character Noah, and it Noah, but it's a woman. Her name is Noah. Um, and they even acknowledge, like, not a lot of women named Noah, whatever. She wanted to
Yeah.
call her Noah because she's this would-be savior of humanity. Um, and basically she was when these creatures invaded, and their invasion was pretty limited. They basically just landed in the deserts, set up huge domes. They kidnapped a bunch of people to try and figure out what was going on with humans. And it wasn't out of any kind of malice. At least this is Noah's
Yeah.
description. There was no kind of malice in it. They were just like, what are we dealing with? Are these even intelligent creatures? And they ran studies on them like we do on like lab rats, basically. And
Yeah.
they did it for a long time. Noah
Hmm.
was one of them. She went through some bad shit. When they let her go, she fell into the hands of the government, and the government did even worse shit to
Yeah,
her.
arguably worse shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
arguably worse because
She says
as
it's
you
worse. Yeah.
she says it's worse, but I'd have to kind of agree because what she says is that the what you were saying, Jacob, was that the communities when they're experimenting on humans before a language, a universal language was developed, which I guess are signs, like I guess human beings move their gesticulate with their arms and their hands in a visual pattern that makes sense to these communities. But she says that at least they were unintentionally harming people because they just didn't know how we work. Like you were just saying,
Hmm.
the U.S. government once they found out that she was one of the first person to leave one of the bubbles, they know what they're doing. They know the extent of human pain and suffering, and they still do it. And I thought that, unlike the Talik, like I had more sympathy for these aliens, even though they're arguably doing, I mean, at least it was described like horrific shit to people. But it's out of this, well, I gotta be careful here because as human beings, we do this shit all the time, right? Well, we don't know because it's other life form. We can't imagine that it has feelings as we do. But
Hmm.
I'm more sympathetic to the point that they were just like, oh shit, like we just killed this guy. Maybe we shouldn't do that again, you know?
Hmm.
Hmm.
If only to keep him alive so we can keep studying this person.
Right. They have like this removed, this detached. Sorry, Joss, you were
Yes.
about to say something.
Yeah, no, well there and there is a bit more of a sense of there is a bit more of a sense of the communities easing off once they figure out exactly what they've done, once they figure out how to communicate with these strange people called humans. And I mean, this is jumping ahead a bit, but once they figure out how to sort of how to interact with us in a more nuanced way. That includes defending themselves
Mhm.
from humans striking back at what they correctly see as an invasion, right? And what they do there is more targeted in a way that I think leads one to believe that that they're willing to be a little more compassionate than indeed the U.S. government was.
Mm. There's a quote from it too, and this is what sort of sums up the captivity she had of the US government, because the US government takes her in as soon as the aliens release her. And she says, and this is a direct quote, they did all of this because they knew absolutely that a captive who survived 12 years of captivity and who is then freed must be a traitor of some kind, willing or unwilling, knowing or unknowing. They x-rayed me, scanned me in every possible way. When they found nothing unusual, it only made them angrier, made them hate me more. I was somehow making fools of them. They knew it, and I wasn't going to get away with it. And she's
Mm.
in this situation. She never tries. She tries to kill herself. They stop her from killing herself, the US government does, and then just treats her bad and says she did it to like get better attention. And she goes through all this
Yeah.
horrible stuff, and there has to be this prolonged legal case to get her out of prison. um and she, after experiencing all of these things, and I'm running through the plot really quickly because like just so people understand the broad strokes.
Mhm.
um, After experiencing all of these things, she ends up realizing, okay, well, we have to coexist with these things. They are more powerful than us, especially a reveal that happens at the very end. We cannot stop these things. We need to understand each other. And since
Yeah.
she can speak their language, the language of the communities, she goes and works for them, and she works to basically as an intermediary between the
Yeah.
communities and humans. And what do the communities need with humans? Basically, when they wrap them up, which is the way they communicate by like enfolding them, which again gave me the heebie-jeebies. Imagine getting crawled
Yes.
on by a bunch of whatevers.
Yes.
Octavia Butler's aliens like to give hugs.
They do
They really do. They're very
strange
physical.
hugs. They are. Um, it gives them like a high, and they have no
Yes.
familiarity with drugs, so they're getting high on
Yes.
humans, and humans are once again in a symbiotic relationship, and this time humans are the drug.
Yeah. And the humans enjoy it too, right? And
Yeah,
also
they kind of
too,
like it.
I guess the sort of because the way with the way it kind of starts, or I guess the narrative sort of drive it is that Noah is I guess having like a kind of like how what's the word for it? Like an interview process with a bunch of applicants, right? Like people who are also going to be intermediaries with this alien species.
Hmm.
And the whole time I'm like thinking like, okay, like, well, what are they being hired for? Like, what's the job? And the job is like it's this transfer and flow of information, but of sensation, I guess, but information as well. Like all they want to do is they want to know about us, you know? Like they just want to
Hmm.
know like our culture or history or something that they're curious about. And for some reason, like this cultural exchange, I don't know, like that was like really creepy and kind of horrifying to me, you know, because
Hmm.
it's like it's one thing to like I guess like to be an alien species where you can like shapeshift and look like a human being or a zoo hypothesis thing, but it's another thing to like not really enslave these people, but in order to live with them, to understand them in a cold scientific way. Something about that just really gave me the heebie-jeebies, and the unfolding of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess it would have. I guess it would have been cliche if, like, again, they wanted physical material resources. But Octavia Butler never goes that route in either of these stories. You know, whether it was in
Yeah.
Bloodchild or in this one.
But they aren't slaves. They are employees. There
Yes.
is a wage relationship. Aliens coming to
Yes.
Earth, and we don't know exactly why, started a global recession, a global super recession. I
Yeah.
just guess everybody was like, "Why am I going to work tomorrow? There's aliens. Fuck this," you know.
Yeah.
Which, like, fair enough.
Would be my
Um,
response as well.
yeah, exactly. And so I think and so the aliens have, resources, and it's interesting. The aliens had no theory of capitalism, but they adopt it pretty quickly. Um, and capitalism has even infected this relationship. Even notably, Rune Johnson, one of the potential employee says humans have been, quote, evicted from the universe center. There's multiple references to material relationships of money. The humans constantly say the aliens are evicting them. Even when one of the humans makes the point, well, they didn't take any land that we like give a shit about, but the guy's like, well, they took our land, like this possession.
Yeah.
So like capitalism, which is a thing these aliens don't have any relationship to, is actually really like is really like forming this relationship between them. And the whole concept of employer employee comes from the human side. The humans come forward with the
Yes.
treaties and the this and the that, and here's what we're going to do with our materials and our resources. The aliens didn't have any such proposal or any such concept.
Well,
Yeah.
and there's
Yeah.
even like gradations of wage, right? You can get paid a certain amount if you enter into this relationship, right? And if you don't speak the alien's language, if you don't learn as what of it that you can express as a human, fine, whatever. They'll still derive some value out of it that way. But oh, here we go. If you want to move up a pay grade or two and be given work that might actually interest you, learn the language, right?
Yeah.
So, there is that sort of separation of people into different wage categories, which I can only assume that they picked up. Jacob just said they picked up from us.
Yeah.
Reminds me of
Yeah.
my job where I was told, I was like, oh, so we have all this paid time off. And they're like, yeah, but if you want to do well, don't take the paid time off, whatever.
Yeah.
Not with that employer anymore.
It just made me think about like a lot of it made me think about kind of assimilation, like when people come to this country and the English is not their first language, but
Mm,
if they want to not even want a job, but to fill out paperwork,
yeah.
English might be the only language. And I think one character actually says, I think it might be either I forget their names, but there are two characters. There's an angry young red-haired woman, and there's a black guy that are very antagonistic towards these communities. And I think one of them says something like, "So they come here and steal our shit, and we have to speak their language," And I
Hmm.
just found that was very, again, like she's talking about a lot of different things here, but a lot of it like was sort of this assimilation or sort of I don't even say immigrant experience because the humans haven't left Earth like they did in Bloodchild.
Right.
We've just been evicted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The aliens got here and they're not leaving. They in fact can't.
Exactly.
They were one-way rocket ships.
Yes. Yes. I
The
love. I
aliens are
love that.
stuck.
By the way, I love
Mm,
that. By the way, that like, yeah, like they can't go back, even though they have this awesome technology. They kind of like blew it in one shot, and now they're here to
mhm.
stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the
Well, again,
humans try. Oh, go ahead.
it's an inversion that forces you to consider those dynamics of immigrant versus the host country, right? It's not the
Yes.
people who have come to this new place that have to suddenly assimilate, like we have to assimilate to the people who have come here.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
it's interesting that with the, no pun intended, the bomb that gets dropped at the end, which is basically, oh, the humans did try to do a war against these aliens, and they didn't make this public. They launched a bunch of nukes, and the aliens returned the nukes unexploded, half of them
Half of them exactly.
to the humans, and they just like popped up in the Oval Office and stuff, just like a full nuke just sitting there, and kept the other ones. So these aliens, whatever tech they have that kept nukes from erupting, and
It's
were able to return them.
interesting.
But
It's
it's
interesting to
above the
me
human.
that they didn't keep all of them, right? They
Mhm.
gave
Yeah.
half of them back to
I
us.
think it's just this was to show they didn't need them. Like I think it's a flex, you know.
Yeah.
That could
Yeah.
be. It's
And
also
Yeah.
interesting. I wonder if they didn't learn the concept of mutually assured destruction from us at some point.
yeah, maybe. And it's we don't know much about these aliens, and it's almost impossible to know. And Noah wants to form this connection because she just genuinely wants human beings to survive, like a very normal wish. And of course, her name is Noah. We could see what
Yeah.
Butler's doing here. It's in this case though, it feels more like if Noah was trying to save. Well, I guess Noah was trying to save humanity from God. But that's a whole different thing.
Mhm.
The
Well,
idea
I do
of like
think as
Noah,
well. I do think as well there is a dialectic that the aliens have kind of fallen in love with or discovered is necessary, right? Because we mentioned the concept of humanity as addictive drug, right?
Yeah.
That some of these aliens need that connection to adapt comfortably to this new environment that they're in, right? Which again, mutually assured destruction is I think what the in my mind is what they settle on, right? Because okay, well, if we have to exterminate humanity, then we're not going to be able to hack it on this world, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And also too, um, Noah's kind of position is assimilation is better than annihilation, you know.
Right.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's better that that knowing what they've done to me, which is not as bad if you can believe it or not, than what the humans did to me. The only way that we can assure that this incredibly more powerful, technologically advanced, and like scientifically detached species does annihilate us is if we give them what they want, which is, and again, an exchange of information and sensation, which I mean, for me again, that seemed much more poignant than aliens coming to Earth for resources like
Right.
gold or water, you know?
Well, you'd have, yeah. And it's also interesting that the aliens are here at all. They're not here for any one reason, right? They're not here because, oh, Earth has X. They're not here because the humans are drugs. They figured that out. They're presumably just kind of
Yeah.
explorers. They're like, we're going
Hmm.
to spread our species across the stars in a very um interesting way. It's like, um, Joss, I think of Mountains of Madness, where he has the bit where he
Mm,
sees the alien species and he says, whatever they were
They
men
were
because they
men. They
were
were men. Yes.
investigating and they were interested and they were curious and they died
mm,
because of it. And these things, and in some ways, they have these human-like qualities, even if we can't connect to them, even if we don't know what one of them is, one of them's a million things. They did launch themselves across the galaxy
Hmm.
on just sort of a whim to just find a new place. And I think Noah sees that and she has like she wants to understand in a special way. And she's this intercessor between these sort of little g gods and man in the way that Noah and whatever and her, but in this case, human bodies are the ark that are
yeah,
Noah's ark.
yeah.
Human bodies are a drug trip of an ark, which is I don't know what Octavia Butler was cooking, but it's she's
You,
got some great stuff going on in that head.
you know what I was thinking too is like sort of like maybe the communities were sort of a reflection of humanity itself, you know?
Hmm.
Like, I mean, especially, you know, if you think about it, maybe the United States itself, if we're looking at that kind of that sort of long historical view, just like what we do to other countries, right? To other communities, right?
Hmm.
How like where like I think about like like when I was reading this, I was kind of thinking about like phrenology and race science, right?
Hmm.
Like how
Hmm.
like these I mean like not to say these people weren't fucking they were fucking awful people, but they really saw this as a discipline and a science. Like an
Right.
actual like study of the natural world, right? And
Hmm.
like it was sort of like like these characters, especially the ones that were the applicants that are upset. I just found it kind of funny that their complaints are complaints that you could levy against humanity or the United States specifically writ large, right? Or
Hmm.
any kind of state, right?
Right.
Um, that engages in this process of forced assimilation, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's you kind of twigged something in my head there. It's interesting that you have these disciplines, to the extent that they were, disciplines, phrenology and all that, that um they sort of seek to explain the prejudices that one's brought up with, that one's surrounded by, that one indeed materially benefits from, whether they know it or not, instead of interrogating them. And
Yeah.
I wonder to what extent that's true of the I wonder to what extent that's true of the communities. But again, you would have to understand, what prejudices they hold against us. And I think that's what separates it from the race science angle, right? Is that they're genuinely going into it with from a position of ignorance.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting because Octavia Butler is also not doing the like easy, actually humans are the real evil thing here either. Like, yes, humans are maybe at least the American government is the greater, more aggressive, but it's
Mhm.
not like, oh, these actual benevolent aliens. We're not doing like, I love Avatar, but this is an Avatar. This isn't like,
Yeah.
oh, throw in with the Na'vi. This is like there has to be some kind of synthesis here or humanity dies
Mhm.
out. And that's it's interesting, and this is the one especially of the three that I was like, yeah, this could be a full novel.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It also really go ahead.
No, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
Well, it also really illustrates to me, like, we've kind of slagged on the idea of, okay, what do aliens have that what do we have that aliens would want that lead them to invade, right? And that's sort of the first question that you have to answer when you're justifying aliens, right? I'm thinking of Three Body Problem. Have you read Three Body Problem, Aaron?
No, I need to read that. I need to read it.
It's a banger. It's a banger.
Yeah,
We
we have
read
an
that
episode on it.
earlier. Yeah, we read that earlier, and
An episode where we had to be like, all right, so let's talk about the Cultural Revolution. Yeah, anyway, because
Before
that's
we
what
go
it's
talk
about.
about the book, because you'll have to know about the Cultural Revolution before we read
Literally, we had
Mhm.
to. Yeah, that's part of the
But
plot. Yeah.
that's the thing, it's like the Trisolarans, the aliens in that book are like down to their last world or whatever. They're looking for another one. They didn't have to run into humanity. They ran into humanity because we happen to be there, right? And it's not necessarily that we have something they want, right? It's just that we're there, and what do you do when you're alone in this hostile universe and suddenly you not only A, find another alien species, but B, you're put in that position of, okay, well, we're going to collide and possibly one of us is not going to survive, right? And that's the sort of thing that alien stories really interrogate is, okay, how do these populations interact, right? How do they
yeah,
come to an understanding? And indeed, how does that manifest in brutality and also, attempts to transcend it?
yeah. And
Absolutely.
I liked also towards the end of it, one of the characters is like, there has to be a way that we can fight back, right? And I think Noah just ignores that completely and just says, okay, we're ready to like, I'm ready to take you in now. And it's just there's this constant thread of resistance throughout the conversation because there are a
Hmm.
couple applicants that are also asking like, don't you hate them? And it's
Right.
like Noah's like, it's kind of like, no, I'm beyond hate, right? And I
Hmm.
think one person also is like, I don't even forget what the line is, but they're like, I don't even hate them necessarily. I just don't want them here, you know.
Right.
And like a lot of the story is just like kind of, I think the hate is sort of perpetuated by the fact that we don't know why they're here. We don't even know what they look like, right?
Hmm.
Which is another thing again that creeps me out because despite the descriptions that she gives, right, of these
Yeah,
bushes,
it's vague.
yeah, it's very vague, and you still get the impression that people are really not sure if that's even what they look like, or even
Hmm.
what it looks like inside, inside of one of them. And again, that fear of like the other and the unknown, like she's dipping in not only cosmic horror, but also just like, like sociology, right? Like the sort of in group and out group, what is familiar to us and what is uncanny.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Do y'all have any and again, I say last thoughts. Of course, we could keep talking about this, but just for the interest of time, I definitely don't want to miss Book of Martha. Do y'all have any, closing thoughts on this story? Um,
Actually,
in
I
general?
I like you know what? I was trying to figure out which of the stories I like better out of these three. And I like all three of them. But out of the two alien invade, I don't even call them invasions, right? I think I like Bloodchild, I like
Hmm.
Bloodchild a lot, but I think I like this more because although it was really just about a conversation, really, like a lot of it was told by Noah telling her
Hmm.
backstory. It just the sort of ambiguity and the mysteriousness of the aliens and this sort of especially the banger at the end, the bomb thing, that really freaked me out, because
Yeah,
that's sort of like,
the
damn man,
menace at
like,
the end.
yeah, you really don't have any way to get out of this but through.
Hmm.
Which again, I think Josh, you had mentioned this. It's sort of like when you were talking about the botfly and the infection, right? That, and I think Octavia Butler would agree that like struggle and not acquiescence, but adapting, right? Is a necessary quality for like life and maybe the
Hmm.
continued survival of the human race, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I also
within
just, sorry, go ahead.
I just subjective conditions within the objective.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I, as a closing thought, I just realized this, and of course, it had to end on something nuclear because it was about nuclear scientist Dr. Winho Lee. So of course, she had to close it on something nuclear related, and
Oh
that
shit, I
all
just
was
realized
about
that. Yeah.
nuclear secrets. No, I realized it while I was sitting here just now. And so we'll just conclude that on Dr. Winho Lee. Sorry you went through that. Come on the podcast if you want
Yeah, come on the
to.
podcast,
Come
brother.
on the pod.
Please.
I hope you found some peace. Holy shit, I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, I really
Um,
hope you did.
yeah. absolutely.
Yeah,
He wrote a physics tech
nothing,
book pretty recently, so
nothing.
he's
Yeah,
back on his grind.
nothing material can replace or undo or fill the gap that's been torn in his life, certainly. So,
Yeah. Well, let's on the I don't have a good segue for this one. So just jumping into the Book of Martha, and this is my favorite one. Um, published on
the
sci-fi.com as
Book
well.
of Martha,
Is that a
Martha.
what is this a reference to? I don't you
Yeah,
Have
gotta
you not
no,
seen the
help me
Book of
out.
Mormon?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Sorry.
There we go.
no, that was
My
actually good. You should have kept going. That was great.
well done. Yeah,
That's
no,
pretty good. That's pretty good.
Joss and I have some running bits we do. Not on the podcast, but maybe it should become where we make musicals about random things. There's a running Chinese Revolution Hamilton musical that we've been coming up with in our text.
I'd watch that.
Yeah, it would be terrible. It would be
In
really
like
bad.
2056, Mao light up on Broadway. That would be, it just has to be written by somebody other than fucking Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Oh
Yes,
man.
indeed.
But the Book of Martha, published on sci-fi.com in May 21st, 2003. It is the other addition to this book. We chose two late editions here.
Mhm.
And this is a story about trying to create the perfect world.
Yeah.
And this book was interesting to me. This one was interesting to me because I had to like think, what would I do in this woman's shoes? Essentially, you have
Yes.
Martha, and she is dreaming, but it's real, of
Or
God.
dead? Is he
She's
dreaming or
she's
yeah.
in a she's in another space where she's speaking with God for
Mm.
sure. Dreaming, dead, something. She is coming back though.
Yes, yes.
And she's speaking with God, who throughout the story transforms based on her own perceptions. Starts with these sort of base perceptions of God as a big white man with a beard and a throne, and throughout the story will transform to be smaller, and then will be a black man, and then will be a black woman that looks like her sister. And God basically is, in this case, pretty bored. Like, it seems like this is just God is kind of bored.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and God tries to come off as more benevolent, but like I think God's not totally benevolent here. God
It's
is
almost
just,
sadistic almost in a
yeah,
way.
it's
It feels
interesting.
like like a little kid with the what do they call with the microscopic with the why am I not
Over
finding
the
this
ants,
word?
yeah,
Microscope.
the
Yeah, with
magnifying
the
glass, yeah.
magnifying glass with the ants almost, and
Right, we're
now
playing a game of Sims, maybe.
yeah, basically, and now he just wants to see what somebody else would do differently. And not even
God,
in a malicious way, but it's curiosity, right?
yeah, God's already given up the all knowingness just because it bored him. He has
Yeah.
that power and he gave it up. So
Yeah.
he's even having to ask Martha, or he, she, they. The gender
This
is
is a
fluid
god that
here,
can indeed make a rock so heavy that they can't lift it.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
They
Because
can
literally, yeah.
lock themselves out of this knowledge.
Yeah.
absolutely. And basically tells Martha, this woman who is a writer by trade, a novelist by trade, very similar to Octavia Butler,
Mhm.
I feel like is kind of the point there.
Yeah.
Tells it says came from a poor background, struggled to become a writer, black woman writer. Yeah, it's her life.
Yeah.
And he tells Martha, okay, you have the powers of God. You get to make a couple decisions here. There's no implication that you get to then change the things, right? You make your decisions here and you go into the world and you live.
Yeah.
And you got to deal with the decisions. And as a bonus, you will live at the lowest caste of whatever the world you create is. And it's not like a situation where it's like I don't know, what's the movie Bruce Almighty, where she's going to be able to adjust things in the world. She's not going
Yeah.
to get to come back and reverse anything. This is one time only. What adjustments will you make to the world? You have all the time you need. And God will give her advice, but mostly the advice is just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
God's like
Yeah. Yeah.
the almighty dungeon master. You sure you want to do that?
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
this is like picking your loadout, before you
Mm,
get into the lobby to play like a, like a shooter game or something like Call of
yeah.
Duty or some shit like that. You can't once you got what you got, you can't go back.
Mm.
Yeah.
Which the implications of this, what this story reminded me, actually, it reminded me kind of Those Who Walk Away from Amelis, right? By
We were
Ursula
just
K. Le
discussing
Guin.
that.
Because he says to her, you have the opportunity to save humanity from its own self-destructive nature, especially with the way we're ruining the climate, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of it is a conversation about her not being sure if her actions or choices will have the intended effect and if it'll actually create the utopia that she imagines. And I guess how much would one be willing to sacrifice to create that perfect world?
Right.
Um, and yeah, I just kept getting those who walk away from Melis vibes, which is a story that I love a lot. But this well, we could talk about it, but her prescription for the solution actually sort of ends up at a disadvantage to her own craft, right? And her
Yeah.
own art, her own passion, her livelihood.
Mm. It's interesting too that she chose the name Martha here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Martha in the Bible, do y'all know much about the story of Martha?
Nah.
So Martha, very minor character in the Bible. So much more famous is her brother Lazarus, who was raised from the dead by
Oh.
Jesus, right?
Lazarus
But
pit, okay.
Martha, while Lazarus is being, risen from the dead or whatever, she does two things. One, when Jesus comes to visit Lazarus, she criticizes him and she says, "You should have gotten here earlier. You could have saved him." And then he's
Okay,
like,
Martha.
and then he's like, "Oh, why don't you have faith in me? I can raise the dead too." And then she's like, "Oh, well, I just kind of got dunked on." And then Jesus dunks on her, and then Jesus dunks on her again another time in another story where he's at her house and he's teaching, and she doesn't listen to his teachings because she's spending too much time preparing food for the guests, washing dishes. She's worrying about the little details. And her
She's like, all right,
sister,
guys, shut up. Let me pull this out the oven real quick,
right,
guys.
literally that, yeah. And her sister Mary, not the Mary, the mother of Christ, or Mary
Mhm.
Magdalene, third Mary, very common name in this time, I guess, is listening to Jesus. And she says, and Martha says, "Jesus, make Mary work." And Jesus says, "Martha, no, Mary is caring about the higher calling, and you're just caring about earthly details."
Mm.
Also in legend, she tamed the monster, the Tarask, but that's like Catholic
What
extra
is the
legend.
Tarask? What kind of
Like
monster is that? Is it like
it's a
Leviathan?
no, it's like a it's like a giant sort of dragonish thing. It's the
Hmm.
most powerful monster in D&D. Um,
Yeah, you gotta kill it. You gotta reduce it to negative 30 HP, and then you have to use Wish to make it stay dead.
yeah.
Uh,
But anyway, she's an interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff. This idea of this like cynic, this critic, this person who's detail oriented, and God used to choose. And I know I've been talking for a second here, but I'm really excited about this.
please.
God used to choose the Marys of the world, right? In the Jesus
Hmm.
time, God used to say, "Mary, no, I prefer you, you who listen to me, you who whatever." And now, 2,000 years later, humanity is becoming more adolescent. God is annoyed with all of this. And God is like, "Wait, I prefer the Marthas. I want to give the
Yeah.
Marthas the power now." And that is what I find so interesting about this.
Yeah.
And this isn't by accident because Octavia Butler was raised and was drilled the Bible into her as a kid. We talked about that in the last episodes about her, but she knows the Bible forward and backwards. She was raised in the
Mhm.
church in a way that, to the extent that she resented the church. So she knows this stuff. This is not an accident. She did not choose a name at random. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that
But
gives
no,
y'all any thoughts.
Mhm.
no, that after you tell me that actually, because this was probably my least favorite story,
Mm,
at first, until I got to the end though, and
the
we'll
end is
talk about
interesting.
that. What solution she what she decides to pick her one genie wish, um,
Yeah.
but the symbolism with Martha I think is really interesting because when I was reading it, we were actually talking about this on the Trailblazers, I think on the Patreon episode, but we were saying like, did God turn away from us or did we turn away from God, right?
Hmm.
And in this one, it seems like a little bit of both, right? It seems that not only has God gotten fed up with humanity, but we have, and I guess this is why Martha picks the wish or the panacea that she does, is that if not turned away from God, we've turned away from a higher calling of ourselves, right? And of what we can be, you
Hmm.
know. And Martha has to sacrifice like her craft and her own ability to imagine better worlds and create better worlds and futures for, I guess, almost in like a Jesus sort of way, right? Instead of like dying on the cross, like it's her passion, her craft that dies, right? And
Hmm.
I'm dancing around it because like I feel like the reveal in what she picks is something that's so simple but also so beautiful. Like it's dreams. It's the
Yeah.
ability
Talk
to,
about it. Yeah.
yeah, it's the ability to give people dreams that not rival reality, but that revealed to them better possibilities and better ways of being. And the whole
Mm,
conversation about that is really interesting because God says, well, if the dreams were better than reality, then would people even want to live anymore? Maybe they would kill themselves and rather just be in a dream. Maybe they would lose any impetus to live life as it is. And I think what is her solution? I guess her solution is sort of, but what if the dreams again gave people a better way of being so that then when they
right.
woke up, they wanted to actualize that. And
Inspiration.
yeah,
Mm.
inspirational. And then she thinks about it and she says, actually, I really do like the story now, thinking about it as a writer. She says, well, would people still read for pleasure? And he's like, yeah, well, maybe, you know what I mean? But what's the point of creating stories anymore if the dreams that you have are better than anything that you could imagine and
Mm.
they push you towards actualizing this better world more than what you can read on a page?
Mm.
And that was really, really powerful,
The
like
Yeah,
role of
in a Jesus,
authors
like,
and artists.
yeah, in a
exhaust them
Jesus,
with
yeah,
pleasure while teaching
yeah,
them that pleasure isn't everything.
yes,
You know?
yes.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm
It's
done. I just really,
it's
I actually, Jacob. After you saying that, I appreciate the story a lot more. Actually,
Yeah.
this might be my favorite one. Actually, thinking about it
It's
that way.
there's a lot just going on here, and it's like the role of the author, the artist in general, then becomes, and like even the intellectual, the idea of the better future. Yeah, no, everyone will have in their heads a rolled up artist slash writer slash dreamer slash Karl Marx put in their brain and been like, here's the better future and enjoy it and now forge it. And I don't know what that looks like. It doesn't show us what that looks like.
right.
And
Yeah.
I'm glad they
Right. The
don't because
points the point
that's
is to change it,
yeah.
right?
Yes.
And that
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
is fascinating and weird. And I don't know that she made a good decision. That might not work at all. Like that might be a terrible idea. I don't know.
Yeah, because
Um,
it's weird to me because like it's that she settles on this acknowledging that it could destroy her craft, right? Because essentially, because what's the role of the writer, as you said, right? Give somebody a vision to strive toward, right? Give somebody something to actualize without retreating into these fantasies entirely, right? Um, and she's essentially gave, now everybody has a passive, right? Everybody has that as
mm,
a passive that is just like
Mm.
there. Um, and I wonder because I was thinking about Death Note, oddly enough, right? I was thinking about the limitation that people have, right, about changing the world according to how they believe they should, according to a better version of this world that they are used to, right? Without really
Mm.
interrogating the foundations thereof. That's kind of the trap that you fall into when you're
Mm.
using the Death Note. And I'm not saying it's a trap for Martha, but it's interesting to me that she lands on this avenue of self-sacrifice, right?
mhm.
Because initially, like we should discuss this. Like she goes through a couple of possibilities at first. One, like, okay, what if I just like restricted everybody's ability to like reproduce, right? Everybody
Yeah,
has
she
two
does some
kids.
Malthusian shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. She starts out, like the inadvertent like eco-fascist route, right? But
Mhm.
yeah, this
I was
is what
thinking
she
like
lands on, right?
universal embracing of Dingus thought. No, that's terrible. No, China had its own conditions. It's not. We're not taking a stand on that here. No, sorry. Go ahead, Joss.
But yeah,
You
yeah,
get
yeah.
mad at
No,
us
like
for something else.
Mhm.
it's what she settles on because I wonder if it's not because she has that frame of reference, right? That self-sacrifice doesn't inherently of itself make this a more viable route, but that there's an avenue, it's an avenue that she comes by a little more honestly than forcing somebody else to give something
Mhm.
up, right? Um,
Mm.
I think there is that sort of biblical that sort of biblical framing, that sort of Jesus framing that leads her to that. In no small part, I mean, again, because she's memorized the Bible back and forth, right?
Mhm.
Jacob, I was telling you earlier about how God or this entity who claims to be God is telling her, you're here with me. That's the word that she uses, right? And what I immediately
Mm.
thought of is, okay, the name Emmanuel, right? God with us, right? And in that
Mhm.
moment when they meet, God is essentially flipping the script. It's like, okay, you're with me. You're God with me, right?
Mhm.
Mm.
And so it's something that I think she would have had in mind.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, actually,
And
I like that you brought that up, Joss, because she asked him again, where am I, and he again repeats with me, and I was trying to figure out the significance of that, you know, because it almost sounds like he's saying like, you're a part of me or I'm a part of you
Mm,
almost, you know?
Mm.
Like it's less about like locality in space and time and more about a state of being, right?
right.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
she
yeah,
is in this in-between place. Like we were even saying in the beginning, is she
yeah,
dreaming? Is she dead? I'm not
yeah.
sure. She's able to sort of form reality around her while she's in this space. She's able to be like, okay, I want a sandwich. Okay, I want to be in my apartment. Okay, I want to be in the woods, you know. It's an in-between place. She's sort of forging with her imagination. Um, and sort of and it's strange, and God doesn't feel like a hateful God or a trickster God necessarily. There's a little bit of elements of trickster, but God doesn't seem spiteful. God does seem to want humanity to succeed, but God is also not this all-loving father God either. um
Yeah.
God is this sort of in between. God feels more like kind of an alien in this, like a third alien story.
Yeah.
God feels more like
Yeah.
interested in humanity. And it's like, oh, I did that and that didn't work, so I'm going to do this now. It almost feels a little bit like the communities, the way they were like, where they're trying things with humans and they don't have like bad intentions, but they don't necessarily have the greatest intentions in the world. And maybe God has a little more benevolence in this case, but he still does rely on the humans clearly for entertainment because he said, you know how boring it was to be all knowing. And we don't know God in this sense is full
Mhm.
life. We don't know if God is got other planets he's also managing or if this is the only
Mhm.
one. We don't know the extent of his powers. That's not the point. The point is this decision that like Martha has to make in her relationship with this being. Um, and the point is also asking the reader, you know what, well, what would you do with this and what's the right thing to do? And also thinking of sacrifice, both two sacrifices, one, the sacrifice of her career, but two, also the sacrifice of God tells her you're going to be the lowest class of this world, whatever it ends up being. And
Mhm.
thinking of like the concept of building of sacrifice for a better world.
Yeah, 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 and I love also too. You mentioned this in the beginning, Jacob. And we should touch on it again because I think this is really important. Like how not only does her surroundings shape him like according to her perception, as she kind of like as like a writer, as an artist, she kind of fills out this world, fills up the
Yeah.
page, fills in the colors. Also, like as you mentioned, God themselves, they change, right? From like the bearded white guy in the sky, he's like a giant, to a black man, and then like you said, someone who could look like her sister. And I thought that was really important because as he said to her, you will have to live as the lowest caste, race, whatever, right? And she laughs and she says, like, and this is very Martha-esque from the Bible, right? Now that you told me that, she laughs and says, I'm a black woman, you know, I'm
Yeah.
poor working class. But then God ends up looking like her, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I kept thinking of Leo Tolstoy's. I mean, this is very probably literal, but the kingdom of God is within you. And
Hmm.
again, this idea also too that like I guess Carl Sagan has said this. A lot of people have said this, but the universe, our consciousness is the universe trying to know itself, you know.
Mm.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, maybe like this is God trying to like not really necessarily see what humanity is made of, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just kind of like handing over the reins to someone else who is human, right? Who
Hmm.
knows what it's. I don't know. I just thought it's kind of interesting that he didn't, as you said, he's tried other methods before. He's tried the burning bush, right? He's tried his only son. He's tried dreams, I guess, speaking to people through dreams, but never someone who is a kind of like a god maker in themselves because it's a person who creates worlds, I guess, right? But also is initially resistant to him, you know.
Mm.
So
And
it's interesting that you bring up the universe trying to know itself, right? Because I'm looking here at the very last page or two. Um, and the very last thing, the one selfish thing, I don't know if I call it selfish, but right. But the one thing that she kind of does for herself
she
in this whole
forgets.
equation is that she opts to forget, right?
Mm,
Because what does she say here? She says, I'm afraid the time might come when I won't be able to stand knowing that I'm the one who caused not only the harm, any, possible harm that could come from this, but the end of the only career I've ever cared about. I'm afraid knowing all that might drive me out of my mind someday. And that's what she chooses. She chooses
mm,
to forget. So it's I hesitate to label it a tragedy, but you can certainly see how it might be that way because again, here's the opportunity for somebody to fundamentally change the world. Um, and they're locking themselves out of the frame of reference they have for the way it used to be, right?
Mm,
So it's a sea change that is that you can't really that you yourself can't really trace even as you make it, you being Martha, right?
mm,
Which and what do we do with that, right? What does that say about the way that we interact with the world in an attempt to change it, right? Are we limited indeed by our experience? I mean, we are, but
mm.
um, is it a tyranny that we can't overcome? Open question.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
And
also too,
yeah.
yeah, also too, I'm looking at the I didn't even read the afterword from this, but I mean, and it's probably pretty apparent here why she chooses dreams is because everyone in their own private fantasy, right, can have the utopia that they want. And I was talking about those who walk away from a Melis earlier, but those who walk away from a Melis does present to you what this perfect world looks like, right? The caveat is at what cost, you know? And this one, we don't even know. I mean, because it's the private individual fantasies and worlds of billions of people, right? So Utopia, I get like I'm looking at the afterwards. She says that quote, I don't like most utopia stories because I don't believe them for a moment. It seems inevitable that my utopia would be someone else's hell. So of course I have God demand of poor Martha that she come up with a utopia that would work. And where else could it work but in everyone's private individual dreams, you know?
Hmm.
Um, because dude,
The metaverse.
I thought before, man, if I could do some Thanos snap shit, man,
Hmm.
and just like,
Mm-hmm.
just snap my fingers, and actually I would still do that. I would get rid of all the Nazis, all these terrible fucking
Right.
people.
Yeah.
Still, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would very much like be other people's hells. And sometimes I think about this too. And we're motivated obviously by I don't even want to joke around, call it the immortal science, but it is truly like this scientific, but also like rational, not even moralistic way of looking at the world. And I doubt any of us here that I think the world that we want to create would be not a paradise, but would be like the way that we should live as human beings, living out our true potential. But it did make me interrogate sort of my own ideas sometimes and how I think I'm the arbiter of like what
Mm.
is actually true and
Mm-hmm.
how much of that is based on my individual perception, right? As a human being, my quote lived experience. And yeah, I mean, no, sometimes I'm like, yeah, would it do would is utopia possible? Would it is it can it exist? And I think that she provides the answer here, but yeah, but in your dreams, right? Only in your dreams,
Yeah.
you know.
It's
Well, and I tell
interesting
you what
because
else. Sorry, go ahead.
oh well, it's interesting because the dark side of this, the evil version of this is the metaverse, right? You live
Yeah,
in your own little world and you have a
yeah.
miserable life and your 9 to 5 is terrible, or and then you escape for a few hours into the internet where you're a god king. And that's not what Martha's trying to get here. In fact, that's like the opposite. She's talking about have this refreshing moment of rest and then you can try and build it versus the
Mm,
idea of like leave reality behind. But
Yeah.
one wonders, will humans be able to leave the dreams behind? And that's an open question, and a
Mm,
mm,
question that, if it was answered, would defeat the purpose, because we are living in the world Martha created. We are living in a world where
yes.
we have these dreams that exist from amazing writers like Octavia Butler, who I was thinking less than 3 years after she wrote this story, she died.
yeah, yeah.
She died unexpectedly. She was in her 50s and she had an accident, and it's reportedly she had a fall that led to her stroke. And she has a beautiful quote of one day I'll be an 80-year-old writer that she said, and she never got to
Mm,
be. But we
mm,
have these leftover stories and these dreams that we do live in the world that we get to build. And we do have a question of, and us being enjoyers of fiction, do we retreat into the fantasy or do we pull from it and make something beautiful out of it? And what does that look like? Um, and that's a question we kind of have to try and answer every day, sort of through struggle.
Well,
yeah,
and for
yeah.
somebody whose job, whose livelihood it is to build worlds, what could be more utopian than having an all-knowing, person to bounce your visions off of, right? And then pick apart, right?
Yeah,
Mm,
In a sense, this is kind of her dream, isn't it?
yeah.
It is. Yeah. I mean, talking about this really made me appreciate the story even more actually because I've like I've been pretty depressed lately, and I've been like really in apocalyptic mode. You know, you were
Right.
talking about a heat advisory warning earlier, Jacob, and I got that on my
Hmm.
phone for the first time a couple weeks ago. And you know, I maybe I'm throwing a lot of things in here, but I think a lot of it, like, there's this whole the metaverse is one thing, right? Like living in these altered realities or augmented realities, but there's also the whole multiverse, right?
Hmm.
Phase that's going on now. I'm not just talking about Marvel, but I'm talking
There's a
about
lot of things. Yeah.
there's yeah, dude, like everything everywhere all at once kind of
Hmm.
dives into that. And because shit sucks so much right now, like imagining better worlds and better futures or alternative futures. And maybe Octavia Butler was like, I mean, not the first to do it. People have been talking about alternate parallel realities, but reading this now felt especially relevant now that we have a culture that's so inundated with different possible worlds because this one does suck. But like you were saying, Jacob, instead of it being a place that you can escape to, it's where you can build reality out of, you know.
Hmm.
And that was like again also too not completely reassuring, and it isn't quite like a tragedy like you were saying. It's not quite a tragedy, but it is open-ended, right?
No
Like,
doubt.
well, what do these dreams consist of, right? And well, if
And
everyone has their own little private fantasy and wants to actualize that, then I guess we're gonna end up as fractured as we started, you know. So
mhm.
maybe her wish will maybe make things not worse or better, but the same, you know.
I
Hmm.
mean, we talked with Vijay Prashad about the if you could go back in time and change something, what would you change, right? And we're like, oh well, I think, and it's great to be like, oh well, I'd go back, fix the Sino-Soviet split, and now we'd have this great world. Or I'd go back and I'd keep Jesus from dying, and he would just set up socialism way back then. Or like it's easy to do that and like be nostalgic for futures that never were, or whatever, in the
Yes,
grand
lost
sense.
futures, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and at the and that's fun to deal with, but at the end of the day, we have to resolve these things and struggles and build the world based on what we do have. And to quote Vijay Prashad again, this we will make this happen because we are billions, is what he said, and I
Yes,
love that. We are billions, and I always
yes,
remind myself of that. um anyway,
yes. And
before we yeah, I was going to say, as we sort of start to wrap things up, what thoughts do y'all have, towards the end
Mhm.
here?
Yeah, I was just thinking of what you just said. That quote, "We are billions," and sort of like, you know, all these stories are about displaced people or people settling into unfamiliar environments or power dynamics, or in this story, being given like the powers of a god, essentially. Um, but and maybe this is like kind of quietly spoken in her stories, but like the only way out of any of this is through together, you know.
Yeah,
And maybe I guess that's not my criticism of the story, but sort of my criticism of Martha's decision. As beautiful and
it's not
selfless as it
collective.
was, it's not collective. And I think
Hmm.
Octavia Butler is critiquing that, right? I
Hmm.
think she's very aware of that and making that critique. That well, I mean, like dreams are one thing, but and you know, it sounds like some Hallmark card shit to say, but maybe there should be, maybe in the cosmicist sense, there should be a common cause, right, for
Hmm.
humanity. And for us, that project is, you know, socialism. But yeah, I really do like that this story wasn't it wasn't like prescriptive. It wasn't didactic. Like she wasn't trying to say this is the Aesop's fable lesson that you should take from it. Um, and that's why Martha wants to forget, right?
Hmm.
Because she doesn't want to know the consequences of her decision. And I think a lot like there's I just want to read a line real quick actually that God says, right?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Um he says um he says exhaust them with pleasure, God mused, while teaching them that pleasure isn't everything. And Martha says they already know that. And God says, quote, individuals usually know that by the time they reach adulthood, but all too often they don't care. It's too easy to follow bad but attractive leaders, embrace pleasurable but destructive habits, ignore looming disaster because maybe it won't happen after all, or maybe it will only happen to other people. That kind of thinking is part of what it means to be adolescent. And I really like, last thing I'll say, I really like, because dude, again, I am hella black pilled right now. Not really, because I'm a communist, so I'm not really. I believe in like a better world. But this thinking about this phase of humanity as adolescence was really kind of like not infantilizing. It actually made me a little bit hopeful. And although I
Mhm.
haven't read it, it did remind me of the parable of the sower, sort of where our destiny lies in the stars. And this is
Yeah.
only,
Mhm.
you were saying this earlier, Joss, this is only a this is a transitional moment, right? This is a conjuncture, right? This is a flashpoint, you know. People are going through this through some sort of development or process. And that I really like that passage a lot because even though God is critiquing humanity, it did it was a little bit optimistic in the sense that, well, this is just a phase of development, right? And hopefully we'll get
Mhm.
out of this. And yeah, I really now that we again, I can have said this third time, but this is actually probably now my favorite story out of the three that we've read now that we're talking about it. I guess I was resistant at first because I was like, oh well, this is just no, a lot of stories are just conversations, but this is
Mhm.
so fantastical.
Right.
Um, but I guess I had to talk to you guys about it to actually realize, like, this is working on many levels that I appreciate. So,
It's
yo, thank you. I
this,
like the story
yeah.
a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you. No, it's this sort of story, they all are, I think, that demand, well, this works as a send-off, right? Her waking up, and saying, okay, now I have to go out in the world and, see what it's like, it works as a send-off for us as well, because yeah, it's a story that demands to be discussed, right? It's a story that
Yeah.
demands to, you examine, okay, your way of looking at the world and thinking, okay, how do I change it? Okay, where do I get my impetus for changing it in one way or another?
Mm,
Um, it's a, and I think as well, the story, all the stories in a sense are as bleak as bleak as many of them are, as bleak as the subject matter is that they deal with. Um, I think they do encourage the reader to seek optimism and fulfillment in
mm,
not acquiescing, but surviving, in
yes.
finding a reason to struggle on, right? In sort of sketching the contours of the world so that you can one day add your own strokes to the whole painting, right?
Mm.
You don't necessarily know where you're going, but sometimes, it has to be enough to know that you're going somewhere, right? There's a story in this book that we didn't read, which is Speech Sounds. It's about a pandemic that,
I
removes.
gotta read that one. I read the
Yes,
synopsis. I'm gonna read
yes.
actually like, but probably not that I'm gonna go to bed after this, but I might actually before I go to bed. I'm gonna check that one out because it's in this collection.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's my favorite of the collection by far. Like it's a pandemic that strikes everybody silent. It has different effects on everybody. Some people can some people can't read anymore. Some people can't read or speak. Some people can speak but they can't read.
Mm,
And the ruin that wreaks on society. But it
Yeah.
still tries to go on. There's still a bus system operating. There's still a government after a fashion, right? Um, and I'm not going to say how it ends, but it is, I think, the most optimistic in a story of in a book of optimistic stories, right? You have a mode of communication. You share a fraction of the lexicon, of the sort of symbols of the communication that the rest of the world might share. And what
Yeah.
do? You find something that you share among all these different people, and you try and build something off of that, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
Because, that's, just think of how we got here. Think of civilizations meeting, and, you read about interpreters from like the 1600s, right? Of, people crossing seas to get to other continents, right? Where do interpreters come from, right? Where do, Native Americans who can also speak the language, or Europeans
Mm,
who learn Cherokee or whatever come from, right? They come from interaction, they come from struggle, you know and again, it manifests in terrible things, but you know here we are,
mm.
and ours is the duty of forging something better out of what came before.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely, absolutely.
Octavia
And
Butler describes herself as a pessimist if I'm not careful. And I think that's a lot of us pessimists if we're not
yeah,
careful,
yeah,
but we
yeah,
can build a better world. There is
yeah.
possibility. And on that note, before we go, Aaron, do you have anything you want to plug? Any final thoughts you want to drop on us?
Yeah, one thought I was one thing last thing I'll say about Octavia Butler as a writer, as a person, and this is my first introduction to her work. I'm gonna read, definitely gonna read. This is like inspiring, makes me want to write, but also too, I think you were saying, Josh, about in her stories, despite the fact that they may to be dystopian, they might be bleak. there's this optimism, and I don't know what other way to put it, but like, I mean, she's a black woman, she's like, a member of a people like myself who the only thing that we've ever done, any marginalized group of people, any oppressed people, is struggle and not adapt, right? Not necessarily acquiesce, right? But find a way to live, right? Because I mean, I don't know, man. I say this all the time. Like, I kind of refuse to believe, man, that like the fact that like first of all, we're in Atlanta, right? We're in a region of the country that was literally still arguably, and the whole it's all slave, it's all slave country. It's all, but still, right? We have modern slaves, but still, the fact that we are in a part of the country in which like we're able to have this conversation, we're able to have this relationship, we're able to talk like this, and something like even Cop City, right? Just to kind of go back full circle, the fact that they're even fucking doing this shit down here, and the kind of resistance that like they've like meted out against people, like, and that sort of struggle. I don't want to say that this is necessary and this has to be, but the fact that the kind of community and the resistance that's been built up around it is sort of, I don't know, man, it's just emblematic of like not just the radical black tradition, I guess, but like sort of the resistance, like in the South, right, among communities that have been like, terrorized and marginalized for like ever. And I don't know, I feel like all of that comes across in her work without her even trying, just because of who she is, right? That sort of optimism and that continuing to fight and collectivize for a better world. And I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the stories I read in this collection. She's also amazing prosaist, if I haven't said that already. So yeah.
The old world's dying, the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. You can say that about a lot of stuff. I know I've said it about other works, but
the fabric of society must tear where conditions are sharpest, and what do we knit together after that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Aaron. Where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter, my last account. I'm not making another account. If I get nuked, this is it. At not board posting, Afrocosmos. That's what it is.
Man,
I followed you. I followed you from account to account, man. Volcano emoji after volcano emoji.
Thank you. I'm really diseased, man. I need to get the fuck off that site, but or it needs to just crash. But also, people can check out the Trillbillies. People can check out Struggle Session. Everybody Loves Communism, which actually, I was gonna say this to you guys after, but I'll just say it here. I'm gonna ask my co-host actually if it's cool with you guys if we have if Everybody Loves Communism, we have a Lost Futures kind of series where we kind of do exactly this, where we talk about speculative futures and speculative fiction. So maybe we can cross post this. Like I'll ask my when you guys have it done and up, I can ask my co-host of I don't have to ask them, they'll be fucking cool with it, and we'll just cross post it on the Lost Futures.
Cool.
Feed, because,
yeah.
100% would love it.
Oh yeah.
100%. That sounds great. Well, appreciate you coming on, and everybody. Joss, you usually are better than me thinking of episode specific send-offs. You got something?
The Book of Maya. I got nothing.
I'm very pleased that you did that again. I was waiting for that. Thank you.
Have a good one, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again, guys, for having me on.